All right, you beautiful humans. I have been watching the threads where some of you might be upset that we didn't get the updated Mac Mini with the M1 Pro or Max option, but rather the Mac Studio with a significant price jump to boot, and that feeling that there is no middle ground. And my take, as you know it, is often different because you've seen the event already. I don't need to repeat it. So I want to talk about why this occurred from a business standpoint. And no, I was not at all surprised that we didn't see an M2. Apple is going to ride this M1 for as long as they can because those that are really getting caught up in the nomenclature and really just feeling tired of the M1 branding, they're not moving the needle for Apple here. And the question will there be an update to the M1 Mini? Yes, I feel certain that the new design is literally sitting on a shelf waiting for a release. Anyone who's either worked in a similar industry or has had any experience with businesses like this, which I have, will tell you that companies like this have products that are in the pipeline ready for release when the market tells them it's time to release them. And here's really another thing, because I had originally thought about titling the video something along the lines of this Mac Studio, like killing off the MacBook Pro, but this Mac Studio was ready. And if they have no problem throwing these chips in a MacBook Pro, then you better believe that a desktop version is it's really no amazing feat here. But what I will say is that because that entry-level Mac Studio is landing at $19.99 US, there was no way Apple was going to release this alongside the updated MacBook Pros and steal that thunder. If there was any bottleneck, it might have been logistics, but really R&D on this thing was ready for the stage. I believe that. But the issue is that at this price point and knowing that there's an audience that is hungry for that level of power, there would have been a fight for who's headlining this show. That Mac Studio was going to eat into that excitement and the revenue generated from that excitement. And although laptops have a lot of moving parts, at $3,500 US for my M1 Max, I believe that's what I paid for it, you better believe Apple was not using that as an opportunity to leave money on the table. And my debate here would be that performance being on par with each other, relatively speaking, because I know that we have to account for smaller chassis versus the headroom that we'll have in the studio, allowing a bit more pop when it comes to that thermal throttling. So building on that, it comes down to needing performance and mobility, where mobility is really the eye-catching and wallet-grabbing decision. But if you're okay with and have a workflow for a desktop, then the Studio is likely going to better fit your needs, especially if you've always been finding yourself in clamshell mode anyway. However, I also think that Apple understands this debate and really does understand that if you are looking for portability, then you should definitely go with the mobile device. And for those that want to build out a studio, a literal studio, having a dedicated space, or really needing a replacement for their current desktop and wants to remain in that workflow, then the Mac Studio is that answer. But Apple also wants you to have both options. And I think it's an easier sell if these releases are staggered a bit, because if you invested in the Studio from the get and you realize its power, what we have realized all along with these MacBook Pros, you may be satisfied for a few months. I mean, you're going to be satisfied for years to come. But as you get into your workflow, then Apple hits you later down the road with that, hey, if you find yourself on the road, wanting to take your work, wherever you are, wherever you go, why not one of these MacBook Pros with the M1 Max chip in it, the one that you're already familiar with? And of course, this scenario played out in the reverse, where we got the MacBook Pros first, but we did need an update, and it definitely was time. I mean, when we say need, but we definitely needed this update. However, I'd be disappointed if you were lying to yourself a little when you thought, well, my M1 Pro or Max MacBook Pro is great, and I love that portability, but I do find myself at a desk a lot, and then that entry-level device is at the same starting price, the entry-level Mac Studio, as it is when compared to the 14-inch M1 Pro, so maybe it would actually be a great complement to my workflow. And then that MacBook Pro could be used primarily for my commute to the living room. Makes sense. And I know this sounds ridiculous. I get it. But as a business owner and a shareholder in several companies, I study consumer behavior. And as a clinician, I actually study human behavior. So for some of you out there, you are quite miffed by the whole thing that you really wanted something in between the M1 Mac Mini and the Mac Studio, and maybe something that does land around that $10.99 to $11.99 price point. And for Apple's data-driven reason, they decided that the narrative for the market was to cater to a customer base that is willing to spend that kind of money, have a similar footprint, generally speaking, for both the M1 Max and the M1 Ultra. Because according to Johnny, and I'm not trying to get into the engineering nuance here, but that Ultra likely engineered on the same wafer of having some silicon bridge like between, like trying to retrofit that in manufacturing would have created a bottleneck. And that's not what Apple really wanted, but rather having those Ultra chips as an option that the ones that didn't pass QA, then they could just have those binned and marketed as an M1 Max. And again, a lot of the nuance there, but this just makes complete business sense. And the funny thing is that Mac or Apple at this point is really just kind of competing with themselves. Like when you saw like all of the comparisons in the charts, I mean, it was kind of comical. It's like, either showing up at the race, you're the only one that showed up, and you're like, well, I'll give you a head start. Or how about if I do mine unplugged? And you're like, oh, wait, I can do the same thing unplugged as well. So it did get a little silly. And I know that I'm actually saying and a lot. So how about but? But we have been able to perform tasks on the M1 like you could have never imagined when compared to the x86 architecture. The M1 blew the doors off even the old design of the Mac Mini, which is really a starter Mac for just about everyone and was really underpowered, and you didn't have much expectation for it. But also the previously overpriced aluminum chassis that you could stuff in an envelope, and that of the MacBook Air. And before M1, it was literally a piece of overpriced, underperforming hardware. But that is not the case anymore. So for those that think or want more power and really want that in between, Apple is telling you that yes, the M1 will rock faces right off, and you don't need more because it'll, like if you do, if it's not going to do what you need it to do, I mean, and the data is clear that it performs, and if for whatever reason you want or need something more powerful, then they're going to like hold firm for now, at least, that you can just set yourself in front of a higher margin item with the Mac Studio that'll likely not have that nostalgia that is the trash can Mac Pro that ended up seeming like garbage. But they, of course, will cast that net to grab more customers or sheep if you prefer that dig. But that is where they are when it comes to sitting in between the unattainable and very small market that is the current modular Mac Pro lineup. And quickly, my 2 cents right now on that Studio display is that Apple also knows that this will also sell. You can say, give me 120 hertz or else. But with competitors that are out there already with just like within just a few $100s that are appealing to the same market and have similar specs, some of that market share will flow to Apple, because I shouldn't like have to remind you that Mac OS doesn't really play well with a lot of these third-party displays, especially with that scaling. So you're almost guaranteed a smoother experience, and time saved is currency earned. So the display itself will be fine for several creators out there that are doing photo, video work, along with 3D modeling. And hey, if you're a developer that needs something easier on the eyes and the ability to go vertical, I mean, maybe. And I acknowledge your disappointment and your excitement at the same time. You might not like this perspective, and that's okay, because I love a healthy debate, and I am but a mere businessman that just looks at tech and creative workflows through that lens. But hang out with me here. Please do not be shy in the comments. You go out there and rock those faces, and I will see you right back here on the next one. I was actually just making fun of myself on Twitter just like yesterday during the event. Like, I mean, with these Mac Studios, especially with that Ultra, can you imagine how many YouTube channels I'm going to be able to create? It's going to be sick.